The massive galactic council chamber, carved from a single living asteroid and spanning 3 kilometers in diameter, fell into absolute silence as Ambassador Zephyr of the Altaïran Federation rose to address the most important assembly in recorded galactic history. His crystalline form, composed of living mineral matrices that had taken centuries to achieve perfect harmony, caught the station's artificial sunlight and cast dancing rainbow patterns across the curved bioluminescent walls. Honored delegates of the 47-member civilizations, Zephyr began, his voice resonating through the quantum translation matrices that allowed instant communication between species whose very concepts of language defied comparison. We face a situation unprecedented in our 3 million years of peaceful expansion. A new species has achieved faster-than-light travel. The announcement sent ripples of shock throughout the vast chamber. The insectoid Kythera delegates clicked their razor-sharp mandibles in nervous synchronization, their hive mind processing the implications at superhuman speeds. The gaseous ethereals swirled in visible agitation within their specialized containment suits, their forms shifting between states of matter as their anxiety manifested physically. The plant-based Verdians rustled their photosynthetic branches, while the quantum-based collective species flickered in and out of visible existence as their energy forms destabilized with worry. These humans, Zephyr continued, the alien word falling from his crystalline vocal cords like shards of broken glass, carrying with it every ounce of disgust and horror he could convey, are everything we feared when we established the peaceful expansion protocol 3 millennia ago. They are violent beyond measure, ruthlessly territorial, and utterly, completely barbaric in ways that defy our most primitive understanding of civilization. High Counselor Thane of the Verdian Collective, an ancient being whose root system had survived for over 10,000 years, and whose wisdom was legendary throughout the galaxy, leaned forward with his massive trunk creaking audibly. His bark-like features shifted into patterns of deep concern as he spoke. Ambassador Zephyr, these are grave accusations. What evidence do you present to support such condemnation of an entire species? Zephyr's form brightened with grim satisfaction as he activated the massive holographic display system. 3-dimensional images of Earth and human civilization filled the chamber. Towering metropolises of steel and glass that pierced the sky like spears. Massive industrial complexes that scarred the planet's surface. Sprawling urban centers connected by ribbons of concrete and metal. And most shocking of all to the peaceful assembly, vast military installations bristling with weapons of unimaginable destructive power. Observe their settlements, Zephyr declared with barely controlled revulsion. Unlike our harmony-based architecture that grows in perfect symbiosis with natural environments, theirs is built entirely on the principle of dominance over their world. They have carved deep scars into their planet's surface to extract resources, polluted their atmosphere with industrial waste, diverted entire rivers for their convenience, and, most disturbing of all to our civilized sensibilities, they maintain vast standing armies equipped with weapons capable of destroying entire continents. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of shocked gasps, horrified clicks, rustling branches, and energy discharges. The very concept of organized violence, of weapons designed specifically to kill members of one's own species, was so alien to the council races that many delegates struggled to even comprehend what they were seeing. These species had evolved beyond warfare millions of years ago, achieving enlightenment through cooperation, understanding, and the complete abandonment of aggressive behavior. Furthermore, Zephyr added, his voice cutting through the chaos with cold precision, our long-range observation probes have detected over 200 different languages and distinct cultural groups on their single planet, many of which exist in a state of constant conflict with one another. These savages cannot even achieve basic unity among their own species, instead choosing to maintain artificial divisions based on geography, ideology, religion, and physical appearance. Commander Vex of the Quantum Marines, representing one of the few species in the Council that still maintained any semblance of military capability, though their weapons were designed for peaceful law enforcement rather than warfare, shifted uncomfortably in his energy field. Ambassador, what specific recommendations do you present to this council? Immediate and total quarantine, Zephyr replied without a moment's hesitation, his crystalline form pulsing with absolute conviction. We establish an impenetrable perimeter around their entire star system, the Sol system as they primitively call it. No contact, no trade, no diplomatic relations, no communication of any kind. We monitor them from a safe distance and wait for them to destroy themselves, as all violent species inevitably do when left to their own savage nature. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never truly in doubt. Species after species rose to speak, each expressing horror at humanity's violent nature, their environmental destruction, their inability to achieve unity, their primitive tribalism. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous across all 47 member civilizations. Humanity would be isolated, quarantined like a dangerous disease, left to burn themselves out like a dying star in the cosmic darkness. The galaxy's enlightened species would continue their peaceful expansion and cooperation, secure in the knowledge that they had protected civilization itself from contamination by these savage humans. None of them, in their advanced wisdom and perfect harmony, could have possibly predicted what would happen next. None of them understood that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history, one that would nearly cost them everything they had built over millions of years of peaceful evolution. The humans, unknown to their cosmic neighbors, had just been given the greatest gift imaginable: time to grow stronger in isolation while the galaxy grew complacent in its peace. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the reinforced command chair of the UES Endeavour, her knuckles white as her ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system with the characteristic blue-white flash that marked humanity's crude but effective faster-than-light technology. The sleek human vessel, its hull scarred from months of deep space exploration and bristling with sensor arrays, defensive weapon systems, and the distinctive angular architecture that marked human engineering, moved through the void with the predatory grace of an apex predator entering unfamiliar territory. The bridge crew worked with the efficient intensity that had become humanity's trademark in the 18 months since they had successfully broken the mysterious energy barriers surrounding their home system. Barriers they had never known existed, barriers that had been deliberately placed there by forces beyond their comprehension. What they had discovered beyond those barriers had shattered every assumption about humanity's place in the universe. "Captain," Lieutenant Marcus Thompson called out from the communications station, his voice tight with the controlled tension of a man who had seen too many impossible things in recent months. "I'm detecting artificial signals from the fourth planet. Definitely not natural phenomena. We're looking at organized electromagnetic patterns consistent with advanced civilization." Elena nodded grimly, her weathered face reflecting the weight of command in an increasingly hostile galaxy. This was their 9th system showing signs of sudden, catastrophic abandonment in the past 6 weeks. Whatever was happening out here in the frontier sectors beyond the galaxy's civilized core, it was massive in scope and utterly devastating in its effects. "Take us in, careful and quiet," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to expect the worst from every situation. "Full passive sensors, minimal energy signature. I want to know what we're dealing with before whatever did this knows we're here." The Endeavour approached Kepler 442d with the cautious movements of a predator stalking dangerous prey. What they found as the planet's surface resolved on their high-definition screens chilled them to the bone with its implications for galactic civilization. The planet's surface was scarred with massive blast craters that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, their edges still glowing with residual energy that registered on their instruments as completely unknown to human science. Cities that had once housed millions of beings lay in twisted ruins, their skeletal remains reaching toward a smoke-filled sky like the fingers of buried giants. Advanced transportation networks had been reduced to melted slag, and what had once been vast agricultural regions were now barren wastelands of crystallized soil. But most disturbing of all were the massive crystalline formations jutting from the ground like frozen screams, perfect geometric structures that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, structures that their growing database of galactic horrors was beginning to recognize as the calling card of something ancient and terrible. "My God," whispered Dar. James Mitchell, the ship's xenobiologist and one of the leading experts on the few alien species humanity had encountered, his voice barely audible as he stared at the devastation displayed on the main screen. "That's the 12th world we've found like this in 6 months. What kind of weapon system could do this? What kind of enemy are we looking at?" Before Elena could respond, the ship's artificial intelligence, Arya, an advanced quantum computer system that represented the pinnacle of human technological achievement, chimed in with her characteristic calm tone that had become a source of comfort during their months of exploration. "Captain, I'm detecting quantum signatures consistent with the energy patterns we've cataloged from the previous 11 sites. The civilization here was definitely ethereal, gaseous beings with advanced atmospheric manipulation technology and a documented history spanning over 40,000 years. Elena's jaw tightened. The ethereals had been one of the first alien species they had discovered evidence of, and their technology had been so advanced that human scientists were still struggling to understand even the basic principles behind their achievements. "Any survivors?" Elena asked, though the growing pit in her stomach told her she already knew the answer. "Negative, Captain. The crystallization process appears to have instantaneously frozen all atmospheric gases on the planet. No ethereal could have survived such a transformation. Based on the energy residue, this attack occurred approximately 3 standard months ago." Elena stood and walked to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the bridge, staring at the dead world below and feeling the weight of galactic history pressing down on her shoulders. In the 18 months since humanity had broken free from the mysterious quarantine around Earth, a quarantine they had never known existed until they tried to leave their solar system, they had discovered that the galaxy was far from the peaceful utopia that initial evidence had suggested. Something ancient and terrible was hunting the galaxy's civilized species, turning living worlds into crystal graveyards with a precision and thoroughness that suggested not random violence, but systematic extermination. And humanity, isolated and alone, seemed to be the only ones in a position to discover the truth. "Arya, compile everything we have on these attack patterns and the energy signatures. Cross-reference with our xenoarchaeological database and see if there are any historical precedents for this level of systematic destruction." "Analysis complete, Captain. Based on the evidence we've gathered, we're looking at an entity or entities with technology far beyond current galactic standards. The precision of these attacks suggests intimate knowledge of each targeted species' biology, psychology, and technological capabilities. This is not random destruction, this is calculated genocide." Lieutenant Thompson looked up from his station, his face pale with the implications of what they were discussing. "Captain, incoming transmission on the emergency frequency. It's being broadcast simultaneously in over 40 different alien languages." Elena's blood ran cold. Emergency frequency meant someone was still alive out there. Someone desperate enough to risk revealing their location to whatever was hunting the galaxy. "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was broken, desperate, transmitted through what sounded like failing equipment and the advanced universal translation systems that had become standard throughout galactic civilization. "This is High Counselor Thane of the Verdian Collective to any ships in range. We are under attack. Our fleets are destroyed. Our colonies are falling one by one. We need help. Anyone who can hear this, please respond. The Devourers have returned, and we cannot stop them alone." The transmission dissolved into static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the deepest, most secure chambers of Sanctuary Station, buried beneath layers of quantum shielding and defensive barriers that had taken millennia to construct. The Council's greatest shame was about to be revealed to the survivors of a civilization that had once numbered in the trillions. Ambassador Zephyr's crystalline form flickered with stress patterns that hadn't been seen in his species for 50,000 years, hairline fractures appearing and disappearing across his mineral matrix as he struggled to maintain coherence under the weight of what he was about to reveal. He stood before an assembly that was a shadow of its former glory. Barely half the delegate seats were occupied, their previous occupants either dead, missing, or fleeing toward the galactic rim in whatever ships they could commandeer. The historical records were sealed for good reason. Zephyr began, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that spoke of ancient terror and carefully buried guilt. 50,000 years ago, when our civilizations were young and still bore the scars of our violent evolutionary periods, the Devourers nearly consumed all sentient life in this galaxy. High Counselor Thane's remaining branches rustled with barely contained horror, the ancient Verdian's bark scarred from his narrow escape from his homeworld. The Verdian Collective, once numbering in the billions across hundreds of worlds, had been reduced to fewer than 10,000 survivors scattered across refugee ships. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of entire civilizations lost. "You knew," Thane whispered, his words carrying accusation and despair in equal measure. "You knew this threat existed, and you said nothing. My people, my children." Zephyr's form dimmed with something that might have been shame. "They are not from this reality, Counselor. The Devourers exist in the spaces between dimensions, entities of pure malevolent consciousness that feed on the very essence of sentient thought. When they consume a being, they don't simply kill, they erase. The victim's entire existence is retroactively removed from reality. Their thoughts, dreams, memories, the impact they had on others, all of it becomes as if it never was." The chamber fell into a silence deeper than the void between stars. The implications were staggering, horrifying beyond the comprehension of species that had built their entire civilizations on the preservation and celebration of consciousness and memory. Commander Vex, his energy form scarred and fluctuating from his recent battles against the unstoppable entities, leaned forward with desperate urgency. How were they stopped before? What weapons, what strategies proved effective against them? Zephyr's crystalline structure seemed to crack visibly as he prepared to reveal the most carefully guarded secret in galactic history. "They weren't stopped, Commander. They simply left. We assumed they had consumed enough psychic energy to sustain themselves and moved on to other galaxies, other realities where fresh civilizations awaited their hunger. We were catastrophically wrong." The massive holographic display activated with data that had been classified beyond the highest security clearances, showing the Devourers' current advance across the galaxy. They appeared as writhing masses of living darkness, entities that seemed to bend space-time around them as they moved. Entire star systems simply vanished as they passed, not destroyed but erased so completely that even the light from their suns ceased to exist. "The consumption rate is accelerating," Zephyr continued, his voice becoming mechanical as he recited the apocalyptic statistics. 17 core worlds lost in the past month. The Kithra hive minds are completely extinct. Not dead, but removed from existence so thoroughly that we can barely remember they ever lived. The quantum collective has lost dimensional coherence across 60% of their territories. Counselor Nexus of the few remaining quantum entities pulsed with desperate energy, her form unstable with grief and terror. "Why didn't you warn us? We could have prepared, developed countermeasures, evacuated." "Because," Zephyr interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of eons of guilt, "the last time the Devourers came, only one species ever successfully fought them. They were warriors beyond our comprehension, savage and relentless in ways that made our own violent evolutionary periods seem like children's games. But after the Devourers retreated, these warriors turned their attention to us." The chamber's environmental systems struggled to maintain atmospheric stability as the assembled delegates processed this revelation. The few remaining representatives of dozens of species stared at Zephyr with growing understanding and horror. "They conquered everything they touched," Zephyr continued. "Their technology was crude compared to ours, but their capacity for violence, their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, their absolute refusal to surrender or negotiate, we had no defense against such total warfare. We barely managed to exile them to a distant galaxy before they consumed our civilization more thoroughly than the Devourers ever could." High Counselor Thane's voice was barely a whisper when he asked the question they all dreaded. "What were they called?" "The Terrans," Zephyr replied, his form flickering with ancestral fear. "And now, after 50 millennia of exile, their descendants have found us again." As if summoned by the speaking of their name, the chamber's main communication screen flickered to life with an incoming transmission. The image that appeared showed a human female in a crisp military uniform, standing on what was clearly the bridge of a warship. Behind her, through transparent viewports, the distinctive angular shapes of human vessels could be seen moving through space with lethal precision. "Galactic Council," the human said, her voice carrying across the chamber with absolute authority and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the United Earth Systems Navy. We've been monitoring your emergency transmissions and tracking the entity you call the Devourers. Zephyr stepped forward, his crystalline form brightening with desperate hope warring against primordial terror. Captain Rodriguez, our civilizations require immediate assistance. Elena's expression remained neutral, her eyes showing no mercy for the species that had quarantined humanity for nearly 2 decades. The same council that placed energy barriers around our home system, that declared us too savage for galactic civilization and left us to develop in isolation. Captain? Thane interjected, his desperation overriding diplomatic protocol. We acknowledge our mistakes, but if the Devourers aren't stopped, they'll erase every trace of consciousness in this galaxy. Elena finished with clinical precision. We know, Counselor. We've been tracking them for months, analyzing their movement patterns, their feeding behaviors, their dimensional mechanics. She paused, and something predatory flickered in her expression. We've also been preparing for war. Admiral Sarah Kane stood on the reinforced bridge of the UES Retribution, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched her battle group drop out of hyperspace into what had once been the thriving Proxima Centauri system. The flagship's massive viewports revealed a vision of cosmic horror that would have broken the minds of most civilized species. A nightmare made manifest in the cold vacuum of space. The Devourers moved through the system like living shadows given substance, their forms defying every law of physics that humanity had painstakingly discovered over centuries of scientific advancement. They appeared as writhing masses of absolute darkness, entities that seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, their presence causing reality itself to bend and crack around them like fragile glass. Where they passed, the very fabric of space-time rippled with wrongness that made hardened veterans physically ill to observe. The star Proxima, once a reliable red dwarf that had burned steadily for billions of years, had already begun to dim as these entities fed upon its nuclear fire. The stellar winds that should have blown steadily outward were instead being drawn into spiraling vortexes that disappeared into the Devourers' multidimensional forms, leaving behind only void where matter and energy had once existed. Contact bearing Mark 772, reported Commander Jackson Hayes from the tactical station, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to process sensor readings that contradicted everything he understood about the universe. Primary Devourer mass approximately 3 kilometers in diameter, secondary contacts. Composition readings are impossible, Admiral. Our instruments keep returning null values. Sarah nodded grimly, her weathered face showing no emotion despite the churning in her stomach. Composition was a meaningless term when dealing with beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime, entities that seemed to phase in and out of observable reality according to laws that no human scientist had yet managed to comprehend. But humanity had learned to adapt their language, their thinking, their very perception of reality to fight these abominations. Deploy the screamer arrays, Sarah ordered, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had spent months perfecting humanity's most controversial weapon system. Throughout the human fleet, massive cylindrical devices emerged from specially modified cargo bays with mechanical precision. They were ugly, brutal-looking constructions of reinforced steel and quantum emitters, nothing like the elegant, aesthetically pleasing technology favored by the galaxy's enlightened species. But then, they weren't designed for elegance or beauty. They were designed for one purpose only: to cause maximum psychological trauma to entities that fed on consciousness. Arrays online and synchronized, Hayes reported, his fingers dancing across controls that had been jury-rigged with human ingenuity and desperation. All ships report ready for coordinated deployment. Power levels at maximum sustainable output. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. What they were about to do violated every principle of civilized warfare as understood by the galaxy's peaceful species. It was loud, aggressive, chaotic, and designed specifically to cause maximum psychological damage to thinking beings. It was, in every sense of the word, a weapon of pure human savagery. Execute Screamer Protocol, Sarah commanded. The Screamer arrays activated simultaneously across the entire fleet, broadcasting a carefully orchestrated symphony of controlled madness across multiple dimensional frequencies. The transmission consisted of human battle cries recorded from 1,000 different conflicts, death metal music played at volumes that would rupture organic eardrums, primal screaming from humanity's most violent warriors, and underlying it all, the pure emotional resonance of human rage distilled into its most concentrated form. To the council species, it would have been merely unbearable noise, chaotic and primitive. To the devourers, who existed by feeding on consciousness and the ordered thoughts of sentient beings, it was like being forced to consume concentrated poison. The entities that had terrorized the galaxy for 50,000 years had never encountered minds so fundamentally chaotic, so beautifully violent, so perfectly adapted for warfare. The effect was immediate and devastating. The primary devourer entity writhed in what could only be described as agony, its multidimensional form destabilizing as the chaotic human emotions crashed over it in waves of pure, undiluted fury. Its perfect geometric patterns began to collapse, the mathematical precision that allowed it to exist across multiple realities fracturing under the assault of human irrationality. "Target is disrupted," Hayes called out, his voice rising with excitement as he watched readings that had seemed impossible just moments before. Dimensional coherence down to 60% and falling. "It's actually working, Admiral. Follow up with the rage protocols," Sarah commanded, allowing herself a predatory smile. "Show these things what 10 million years of evolution through warfare looks like." This was humanity's greatest discovery about the Devourers, a revelation that had cost thousands of lives to achieve. They could only fully consume minds that experienced fear, despair, resignation, or peaceful acceptance of death. But rage, pure human fury directed with scientific precision, was toxic to them. It was an emotion so alien to the galaxy's enlightened species, so primitive and uncontrolled, that the Devourers had never developed immunity to it. The human fleet opened fire with weapons powered not just by fusion reactors and antimatter containment systems, but by the collective anger of an entire species. Every shot carried with it the fury of billions of humans who had been dismissed as savages, quarantined like a disease, and left to face potential extinction alone. Each beam of energy was charged with the rage of a civilization that had been called unfit for galactic society by beings who now begged desperately for their protection. The devourer entity began to collapse in on itself, its multidimensional form unable to maintain coherence under the sustained assault of purified human wrath. Reality around it started to stabilize as its influence weakened, and for the first time in months, the star Proxima began to burn brighter. "It's working," breathed Dr. Lisa Park, the fleet's xenopsychologist, her voice filled with wonder and scientific fascination. "The emotional resonance is actually damaging its quantum matrix. We're not just fighting it, we're poisoning it with our own consciousness." The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in a secured bunker constructed from compressed neutronium, buried 7 kilometers beneath the surface of Sanctuary Station. The reinforced chambers represented the last fortress of galactic civilization, where what remained of dozens of ancient species huddled together as reports of systematic annihilation poured in from across the galaxy. The very walls hummed with energy barriers that had been designed to withstand stellar explosions. Yet everyone present knew they would provide no protection against the entities that hunted them. "Sector 7 Alpha is completely consumed," reported the Kithra representative, her insectoid form trembling with frequencies that indicated species-wide psychological trauma. "All 17 hive worlds, gone. The Devourers have adapted to human emotional warfare techniques. They're learning to feed on rage instead of fear, converting our defenders' fury into sustenance for their own growth." High Counselor Thane's remaining branches drooped with exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. It was the weariness of a being who had watched his entire civilization reduced to scattered refugees in a matter of months. In the 4 months since the human intervention had begun, they had witnessed impossible things. Humanity had bought them precious time, saved billions of lives, and proven that the Devourers could be fought and hurt. But now even that desperate hope was fading like a dying star. The chamber's massive holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy in devastating detail. Red zones marked systems completely consumed by the Devourers, growing larger every day. Yellow zones indicated worlds under active attack, their populations fleeing in whatever ships they could find. The few remaining green zones, marking safe territories under human protection, seemed pathetically small against the spreading darkness. Captain Elena Rodriguez entered the chamber with measured steps, her pristine uniform bearing new insignia that marked her recent promotion to Guardian Prime of the Human Defense Fleet. Behind her walked a figure that made every alien delegate recoil instinctively. Dr. Marcus Webb, Director of Human Psychological Warfare Division, a man whose very presence seemed to carry an aura of calculated menace that spoke of depths the galaxy's peaceful species had never imagined possible. Dr. Webb was unremarkable in physical appearance. Average height, graying hair, mild features that wouldn't stand out in any crowd. But there was something in his pale blue eyes that spoke of an intellect that had gazed into humanity's darkest capabilities and emerged not horrified, but inspired. He carried with him a quantum data storage device containing humanity's final analysis of the Devourer threat, conclusions reached through methods that would have been considered unthinkable by civilized species. Honored delegates, Elena began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months watching the galaxy burn. We've confirmed our worst suspicions through extensive field testing and analysis. The Devourers are not just adapting to our tactics, they're evolving. Our initial emotional warfare strategies bought us valuable time and saved countless lives. But these entities are now feeding on the very emotions we used to poison them. Ambassador Zephyr's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated barely controlled despair. Then we are doomed beyond redemption. If even human warfare methods cannot provide lasting protection against them, we're not finished, Dr. Webb interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that seemed to lower the temperature in the chamber by several degrees. We've discovered something fundamental about the Devourers that your ancient historical records either missed or deliberately omitted. He activated the chamber's central holographic projector, displaying complex dimensional mathematics and energy flow diagrams that seemed to hurt the mind when observed directly. The equations writhed and twisted in ways that suggested they described realities beyond normal three-dimensional space. They don't just consume consciousness for sustenance, Webb continued with clinical precision that made his words all the more terrifying. They require active sentient thought to maintain their existence in our reality. Cut off their food supply completely and simultaneously across the entire galaxy, and they will collapse back into their home dimension like parasites separated from their host. Counselor Nexus pulsed with confused energy patterns as her quantum consciousness struggled to process the implications. But conscious thought exists throughout the galaxy in billions of minds. How could we possibly achieve complete cessation of all sentient activity simultaneously? The logistics alone would be by inducing temporary unconsciousness in every sentient being in the galaxy at exactly the same moment. Webb replied with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing weather patterns rather than the most audacious plan in galactic history. The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the quantum hum of the station's power systems became audible. The implications were staggering, touching on philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, existence, and the acceptable costs of survival. Thane was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. You're proposing the induced coma of an entire galaxy, the simultaneous unconsciousness of trillions of sentient beings across thousands of species. That's not just logistically impossible, it's ethically unthinkable. The logistics are complex but manageable, Elena interjected, her tone suggesting that humanity had been preparing for this contingency for months. We've been secretly positioning human ships around every inhabited system in the galaxy. Our scientists have developed consciousness-dampening field generators that can be deployed simultaneously from all human vessels, creating a galaxy-wide network of neural suppression. But the risks, whispered the ethereal delegate, her gaseous form swirling with agitation. If something goes wrong during the process, if consciousness doesn't return properly, if there are complications during the forced sleep state. Dr. Webb's smile was perhaps the most terrifying thing any of them had ever witnessed. Completely devoid of warmth, mercy, or human compassion. Counselor, your species have spent 50,000 years building perfect, peaceful civilizations optimized for safety and certainty. But perfection has a fundamental weakness. It cannot adapt to scenarios that fall outside predetermined parameters. He gestured to the catastrophic data streaming across their displays, showing the systematic destruction of one advanced civilization after another. Humanity has run comprehensive probability analyses using quantum computing matrices and advanced statistical modeling. There is a 23% chance this plan will result in permanent neurological damage for billions of beings. There is a 31% chance it will only work partially, leaving some devourer entities active and capable of rebuilding their forces. There is a 15% chance it will fail completely and result in the total extinction of all galactic life. And yet you seriously propose that we proceed with this insane gamble? Zephyr asked, his crystalline form crackling with horror at the casual way Webb discussed the potential deaths of billions. Elena stepped forward, her expression hardening into something that reminded every delegate why their ancestors had once feared humanity above all other threats. Because there's a 31% chance it works perfectly and saves everyone in the galaxy. In human probability mathematics, those are acceptable odds when the alternative is certain extinction. The countdown to Operation Silent Dawn reached 0 across 1,000 worlds simultaneously, marked not by celebration but by the most profound silence in galactic history. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Admiral Sarah Kane stood motionless as consciousness-dampening fields deployed from every human vessel positioned throughout the galaxy. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. One moment the galaxy thrummed with the thoughts, dreams, and fears of trillions of sentient beings. The next it fell into a silence deeper than the void between dimensions. The quantum resonance that had connected all thinking minds across vast distances simply ceased, leaving behind an emptiness that felt almost tangible. All stations report successful field deployment, Commander Hayes announced, his voice unnaturally loud in the sudden psychic vacuum that now surrounded them. Consciousness levels across all monitored species have dropped to 0 across 17,000 inhabited systems. We are the only thinking beings awake in the galaxy. Sarah nodded slowly, feeling the unprecedented weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a gravitational field. For the next 72 hours, humanity alone would determine the fate of every civilization that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The irony was not lost on her. The species once deemed too savage for galactic society now served as the sole guardians of that society's survival. "Status report on the Devourers?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Dr. Lisa Park consulted her multidimensional scanning equipment, her face pale with a mixture of exhaustion and scientific fascination. "They're already showing severe signs of dimensional distress, Admiral. Their quantum coherence matrices are destabilizing across all monitored locations. The massive entity cluster in Sector 12 has begun collapsing into itself. It's literally starving to death without conscious minds to feed upon." Throughout the galaxy, the ancient enemy that had terrorized countless civilizations for 50 millennia writhed in unprecedented agony. Cut off from their essential food source of sentient thought, the Devourers began the slow, agonizing process of dimensional starvation. Their multidimensional forms, no longer anchored by the psychic energy of living minds, started to fade and collapse back into the spaces between realities where they had originated eons ago. But humanity had far more to accomplish than simply waiting for their enemies to die. "Deploy Archive Teams Alpha through Omega," Sarah commanded, activating protocols that had been planned in secret for months. This was the part of the operation they had deliberately omitted from their presentations to the Council, a massive intelligence-gathering operation that would have been impossible under any other circumstances. While the galaxy slept defenseless, human science teams launched from hidden positions throughout Council space, accessing every database, every cultural repository, every technological archive across thousands of worlds with the methodical efficiency that had made humanity the galaxy's most feared species. The mission wasn't theft or sabotage, but something far more profound and controversial. The Council species had spent millions of years developing technologies, artistic achievements, and scientific knowledge that humanity could barely comprehend. But they had also grown complacent and careless, storing irreplaceable cultural treasures and scientific breakthroughs in systems that could be lost forever if their civilizations fell to the Devourers. humanity would ensure that even if the worst happened, the accumulated wisdom and beauty of galactic civilization would survive. Every piece of art, every scientific formula, every historical record, every cultural tradition would be copied, cataloged, and preserved in quantum storage matrices aboard human ships. Future generations would know that these great civilizations had existed, had created wonders, had reached for the stars with hope and determination. Dr. Webb, Sarah called to the psychological warfare specialist who had remained on the bridge to monitor humanity's most ambitious operation. How are our people holding up under the psychological strain? Webb consulted his datapad, his expression unreadable as he processed reports from across the galaxy. Psychological stress levels are elevated but within acceptable parameters, Admiral. The isolation effect of being the only conscious minds in the galaxy is affecting some personnel more severely than anticipated. 12 crew members have requested emergency sedation, 43 others are showing signs of acute anxiety disorders, and 6 have experienced complete psychological breaks requiring immediate psychiatric intervention. Sarah understood completely. The human mind had evolved in a universe full of other thinking beings, surrounded by the constant background noise of civilization and life. To suddenly find themselves alone among sleeping worlds, billions of helpless beings dependent entirely on human protection, created a psychological burden that few minds could process without trauma. Admiral, Hayes called out with urgent concern, I'm detecting unexpected movement in Sector 9. Something is still active near the Alturon home system, and it's not one of our ships. Sarah's blood ran cold as ice water filled her veins. If any devourers had somehow managed to survive the consciousness cut-off, they would be desperate beyond measure, possibly more dangerous than they had ever been before. A starving predator was always the most unpredictable. Take us there immediately. Maximum speed and full battle readiness. The journey to the Altair system took 8 tense hours, during which Sarah watched her crew struggle with the crushing weight of galactic guardianship. Some stared out viewports at the sleeping worlds they passed, overwhelmed by the absolute trust that had been placed in them. Others threw themselves into their duties with manic intensity, unable to face the profound silence that surrounded them on all sides. A few simply sat in quiet contemplation, trying to process the fact that they had become the temporary gods of an entire galaxy. What they discovered at Altair defied every expectation and challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemies. A single devourer entity, significantly smaller than any they had encountered before, moved with deliberate purpose among the crystalline structures of the Alturon homeworld. But it wasn't feeding, destroying, or consuming. Instead, it was engaged in something that seemed impossible. It was carefully repairing the damage it had previously caused. I'm reading massive energy fluctuations, Dr. Park reported, her voice filled with scientific wonder and confusion. But it's not consuming the Alturon structures or drawing energy from them. It's actually restoring them to their original condition, rebuilding destroyed archives and reconstructing damaged artwork with perfect precision. On the main screen, they watched in stunned silence as the dying devourer's dark form flowed over broken crystalline buildings, somehow using its remaining dimensional energy to restore them to their former glory. Destroyed libraries reformed with all their knowledge intact, shattered art installations reassembled themselves into breathtaking beauty, and broken infrastructure became whole and functional again. It's dying, Webb observed with clinical detachment. This entity is using the very last of its dimensional energy to reverse the destruction it caused. The question that remains is why it would choose to do such a thing. 8 months after the great sleep that had saved galactic civilization from extinction, the Galactic Council reconvened for the first time in its magnificent new chambers aboard Humanity Station, a massive orbital construct that humans had built at the galactic core using a revolutionary fusion of human engineering and recovered alien technology. The station itself was a testament to the changed galaxy, its architecture blending the brutal efficiency of human design with the elegant aesthetics of dozens of alien civilizations. The irony was not lost on anyone present that the species once quarantined for their uncontrolled violence had become the galaxy's de facto protectors, their ships patrolling trade routes and their bases serving as sanctuary points for refugees from the Outer Rim territories still being reclaimed from devourer devastation. Ambassador Zephyr's crystalline form had grown significantly more complex in recent months, new facets and geometric patterns reflecting his fundamentally changed perspective on the universe and humanity's place within it. He stood before a mixed assembly that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier, council delegates sitting alongside human military officers, xenobiologists, cultural anthropologists, and philosophers, all working together to rebuild a galaxy that had nearly been lost to interdimensional predators. The question before us today, Zephyr began, his voice carrying harmonic frequencies that spoke of hard-won wisdom and painful growth, is not whether humanity saved our civilizations from complete extinction. They demonstrably did, at tremendous cost to themselves and with no guarantee of success. The question that will define our future is what happens next, how we move forward together, and whether we can build something better than what existed before. High Counselor Thane rustled his remaining branches thoughtfully, the ancient Verdian's bark bearing new growth patterns that spoke of renewal after devastating loss. The Verdian collective had lost 97% of their population to the Devourer's systematic consumption, but the survivors were rebuilding their worlds with a determination and unity that would have been impossible before humanity's intervention had shown them what true sacrifice looked like. Admiral Rodriguez, Thane addressed the human representative with a formality that carried genuine respect. Your species held absolute power over our galaxy for 72 critical hours. You could have reshaped civilization according to your own cultural values, claimed the most resource-rich worlds for human expansion, or simply taken whatever you wanted from our databases and technologies. Instead, you preserved our governments, protected our cultural heritage, maintained our territorial boundaries, and returned our knowledge to us intact. I confess that I still struggle to understand why. Elena Rodriguez, now bearing the unprecedented rank of Guardian Prime and the official title of Protector of Galactic Civilization, considered her response with the careful deliberation that had made her one of humanity's most respected leaders. She had aged visibly in the months since the crisis, the weight of command and the responsibility for trillions of lives having left their mark on her features. Because, Counselor, she said with quiet conviction, we learned something profound during those 3 days of absolute authority. Being powerful enough to destroy or control something doesn't give you the moral right to do so. Power without restraint is tyranny, regardless of the intentions behind it. She gestured, encompassing the diverse assembly around them, where beings of radically different evolutionary backgrounds were working together on problems that affected them all. Every species represented here has developed something unique and irreplaceable. The Alteran's crystalline resonance technology that allowed faster-than-light communication across galactic distances. The Ethereal's atmospheric manipulation techniques that can terraform dead worlds in decades rather than centuries. The Kithera's quantum mathematics that made our consciousness-dampening fields possible. The Verdian ecological restoration methods that are healing worlds scarred by devourer attacks. These achievements cannot be replicated through force or conquest. They can only be preserved through cooperation and mutual respect. Commander Vex of the reformed Quantum Marines, his energy form still bearing scars from his desperate battles against the Devourers, leaned forward with genuine curiosity rather than the suspicion that had once characterized his interactions with humans. But the galaxy has been fundamentally changed by this crisis, Admiral. The old protocols of species isolation and the peaceful expansion doctrine left us completely vulnerable to threats we couldn't comprehend. How do we prevent another situation like the Devourers while maintaining the diversity and independence that makes our civilization worth protecting? Dr. Marcus Webb, now serving as Director of Galactic Defense Psychology and somehow appearing less menacing now that the crisis had passed, activated a comprehensive holographic display showing the new integrated defense network that spanned the galaxy. We've established what we call the Guardian Protocol, a revolutionary system of mixed-species fleets stationed at strategic points throughout galactic space. Human psychological warfare specialists work directly alongside Council species' advanced technological capabilities, creating defensive forces that can respond to any threat that emerges from other dimensions, distant galaxies, or unknown regions of space. And what do humans want from this new arrangement? Asked Counselor Nexus, her energy form pulsing with curiosity rather than the fear that had once characterized her species' interactions with humanity. What does your species gain from this partnership that makes the enormous costs and risks worthwhile? Elena's smile was genuinely warm, a far cry from the predatory expressions that council delegates had once feared from human representatives. We want something that humanity has never truly had in our entire history, Counselor. We want to belong to something larger and more magnificent than ourselves. For the first time since our species developed consciousness, we're part of a galactic community that values our contributions while challenging us to be better than we ever thought possible. We want to explore new worlds and discover wonders we never imagined. We want to learn from civilizations that have mastered sciences and arts that we're only beginning to understand. We want to grow, to evolve, to become more than we ever could have been alone. Ambassador Zephyr's crystalline form brightened with patterns that indicated deep emotional resonance. There is one matter that we must address directly and honestly: the archives. The chamber fell into a respectful silence as they confronted the most controversial aspect of humanity's actions during the Great Sleep. During those 72 hours when every other species lay unconscious and defenseless, human teams had accessed and completely copied the cultural and scientific heritage of every council civilization. It was a violation of sovereignty on an unprecedented scale, yet it had also preserved knowledge that would have been lost forever if the devourers had succeeded in their consumption. "We return everything," Elena said simply, her voice carrying absolute sincerity. "Every database, every cultural artifact, every scientific breakthrough, every artistic masterpiece, every historical record. All of it is returned to its rightful owners without condition or compensation demanded. But we propose something revolutionary for galactic civilization: a shared archive, accessible to all species, maintained by all species, protected by all species working together. No single civilization should ever again bear the responsibility of safeguarding the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of the galaxy alone." The proposal sparked hours of intense debate that touched on fundamental questions of cultural ownership, intellectual property, species autonomy, and the nature of civilization itself. The very concept of shared stewardship of cultural heritage was revolutionary for species that had maintained strict separatist policies for millions of years. When the final vote was called after days of discussion, it passed by the largest margin in the recorded history of the Galactic Council. "There is one final matter of enormous significance," Zephyr announced, his voice carrying across the chamber with ceremonial gravity: "the official status of humanity within the galactic community." Elena tensed despite herself. This was the moment that would determine whether humans remained useful outsiders who happened to be tolerated, or became true partners in the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known.